So, I think let's get going and welcome to this side event here at, oops, hang on. Yeah, thank you very much and welcome to this side event here at Arctic Frontiers about the Society and Advanced Technology in the Arctic 2.1 project, where I'm very, very happy to have colleagues and students who participate in this project for a discussion about transdisciplinary Arctic graduate education, focusing on field courses. And my name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I'm the coordinator of this project, which is supported by HKDIR, the Norwegian Directorate for Internationalization and Quality in Education. And I'm joined today by Federica Scarpa, who is the executive coordinator. And as many of you know, that for running large projects that requires very professionalized management, academic management, logistical, financial management, etc. So I'm very grateful to collaborate with Federica also on this project. And I'm also joined by Professor José Pupin de Oliveira from Fundação Getúlio Vargas in Brazil. José is the main foreign coordinator, and then we have other partners like Andreas Raspotnik from the Nord University in Bordeaux and Whitney Lackenbauer from Trent University in Canada. And then we have students who have participated. And so this project here this project, which is funded by the Utforsk program of the Norwegian Directorate for Internationalization and Quality in Education, HKDIR. I'm a Danish national myself, but Danish and Norwegian languages are quite close. And Utforsk, the Norwegian word Utforsk, it means to explore, to look out, to explore. And this program, which supports university-level educational cooperation between Norway and partner countries, and that one partner country that used to be very important for this strategy was Russia. And I'll talk a little bit more about Russia in a moment. We can no longer collaborate with Russia. And then the other partner countries are Brazil, where José represents. And then we have Canada, for example, Whitney. China, we have Chinese partners. There is India, we have Indian partner. Japan, we have Japanese partners. South Korea, we have South Korean partners. South Africa is also an eligible partner country, but I don't have any polar collaboration in South Africa. And then the United States, where we also have US partners. So thinking about exploring and this funding program and the purpose of exploring and to support university level educational collaboration between Norway and these partner countries, it reminds me of this Danish book, Udsyn, which is something that be easily understandable to Scandinavian speakers, which means to look out, to have a broad view, broad horizon. It's a Danish company history written by a business historian at the Copenhagen Business School, and it's the history of the Danish East Asiatic Company, which no longer exists. The Danish East Asiatic Company was by far the largest and most globalized Danish company ever. And I use this title, I use this book as, and the title is, Udsyn, seeing far and wide, the East Asiatic Company, Denmark and the world. Because the conclusion of that book is exactly that even though the Danish East Asiatic Company as a company no longer exists, the East Asiatic Company played a very important role for Danish business because it trained a lot of people with a very global outlook. It trained a lot of people with a lot of global experience, and those people moved on to, for example, Maersk, a company I'm sure many of you know about, and other Danish companies. So I think that's, very much the philosophy of this Norwegian funding program, and it's also my thinking. So this program here, Society and Advanced Technology in the Arctic, SATA 2.1, well, it started all the way back in 2018, when I and colleagues at UIT, we got the first grant, and that was for a Norwegian-Russian partnership between UIT and the Higher School of Economics in Moscow and the Trapeznikov Institute of Control Sciences, the Russian Academy of Sciences. And that program, original program, it was very much in the spirit of the very extensive collaboration between Tromsø institutions and Russian institutions at very high level. The University of the UIT, the Arctic University of Norway, we had very, very extensive and very high-level collaboration in Russia. And the same was the case for the University Hospital of Northern Norway, which is next to the university, the Norwegian Polar Institute, this conference, and Aquaplan Niva, the company which is behind this conference here. And we had excellent collaboration in the SATA 1 in 2018 and 2019, 2020. We were supposed to go to Moscow, and of course there was pandemic, and we couldn't go. And then things were just put on hold. And then, of course, we had the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago, where it became impossible to collaborate with Russian institutions. And then there was some thinking time, and actually in 2021, during pandemic times, I proposed, and I got funding for SATA 2. And then came the war. And then I redesigned it with this list of partners here. And actually, there's a certain lesson in this development, and it's actually a lesson which is slightly embarrassing for me, because José Pupin de Oliveira, 15 years ago, I was a postdoc at United Nations University in Yokohama, and José was the vice director of the Institute of Advanced Studies there. And of course, I should have learned the multilateral lesson back then. And I should have learned the multilateral lesson, how multilateral solutions are much more robust than bilateral solutions. So if in SATA 1 and SATA 2, I had included partners from many more of the eligible partner countries, then of course it would have been much, much easier to just remove the Russian partners and continue with the other partners. But I had forgotten the multilateral lesson I should have learned at the United Nations University 15 years ago. And yes, the point is transdisciplinary PhD and master's level field courses, bringing together Norway-based and partner-based students for learning across basic research and application, discipline, sectors and borders. And that's very much what I look forward to discuss with you today. And to illustrate these thoughts, I often use this image of what I see as four big systems around us, society, nature, technology, and culture. And they, of course, largely overlap with academic fields. You have social sciences, natural sciences, engineering, and humanities. And often inside universities, it's surprisingly difficult to talk between faculties. But I find it very useful to bring people together across these fields, and I look forward to hear your thoughts about that during this side event. And then also, if we look at sectors of society, a rough model could be the public sector, the private sector, academia, and civil society. And there also, I think it's both very interesting and very useful to work and think across these sectors. And of course, when I myself am involved in European projects, Nordic projects, it's usually a requirement that you work across these sectoral boundaries. And I think for students, I suspect that many jobs for our graduates, they are exactly in between these sectors. And then it's not just between sectors in one society, it's also, it can very easily be transnational. So let's say you are a university in one country that is working with a company in another country, or you are a public sector working with civil society in another country, etc. So that's also what is in this thinking. And then finally, one thing that I find both very interesting and very fascinating, and in fact very positive, it's of course how big and diverse the world is, and reminding myself that I represent a very, very small minority of humanity. Humanity is very, very big. You see here on the left, a representation of population today, which of course shows that especially Asia is a very, very big part of humanity. And that's also increasingly reflected in the composition of the global economy, because with economic development and science and technology development across the world, then population is increasingly reflected in economic output, science and technology output, etc. So thank you very much for your attention. Now I'd like to move on to the first panel, where I'd like to invite, how to say, if I may say, the adults. If I can.
Only by age. Only by age.
I didn't say the elders. So if I can invite Whitney, Jose, Florian, and Andreas, and well, I apologize for the lack of diversity, but yes, please please join. And
Okay.
yeah,
Let's start.
yeah, hang on a second. Just distribute these. Yeah, so I have invited you first, Jose, to speak for 10 minutes. Jose, you have a very, very broad experience with science very broadly, and science and policy, national systems, the UN system. We met in the United Nations University. We just had, you were very involved in the IPCC system. 2 weeks ago, we had a big workshop here in continuation of a IPCC meeting you led in Oslo mid-January. So I'm looking very much forward to hear your views, your visions on this question of transdisciplinary field education. And then I invite the rest of the 3 others of you to give your reflections for 5 minutes. So please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Rasmus and Federica and the SATA 2.1 for organizing this session, invite me to this meeting. I'm getting overdoses of Arctic for me, first time. Like I've been osmosis with some colleagues like Rasmus, like learning something about Arctic, but there's been overdoses, and then it's very interesting. I'm learning a lot, and I found a lot of similarities with the parts of the world that I have more experience. As Rasmus said, I think the importance of transdisciplinary research, particularly in the world where you have all these what call wicked problems, problems that you cannot be solved by one discipline. And then you had example of climate change, the area that I'm more closely related, biodiversity, but also saw the unexpected problems like the COVID. COVID was a health issue, but you could not solve and tackle COVID if you didn't have just other perspectives. And finally, like the Arctic, you see now all the relations between the solutions you had before in disciplinary work or only scientific view, and the importance to engage with a much broader perspective of the world, with the real world. And the transdisciplinary research is the kind of research that is multidisciplinary. You need people from different areas, but also keep people that research that work across, and professional work across disciplines. Also, the importance of co-production. You mean that you work closely with those that would be mostly affected by our research and also could use your research. And finally, a lot of these research also need to be international. Very difficult to have all kinds of expertise and perspectives in just one country. And it's really important to solve these wicked problems. And a little bit, I would say, my career being around these, I started as an engineer, and then I moved over time to social science. Actually, my first job was an oil company, a French oil company, Schlumberger, and then in Argentina. And then I moved across the discipline exactly I was looking for answer. At that time in the 1990s, you didn't have this, like the opportunities that the students have today. The internet could know all the world. You have to really find your way, struggle away as you go along your career. And then I saw that a lot of answers to the curiosity I had in terms of question were in other disciplines, and then moved slowly to more the social science. At the same time, I think that put more in a broad perspective these wicked problems and the biomes. I say I'm very interested in. I work a lot in cities, local I'm very interlocal, but this broad perspective, the kind of not even satellite perspective that Vidal is going to talk, but the biomes of global importance. And one is the Arctic, and I also work a lot in the Amazon, that also Antarctica and others, and they have very actually similar issues that I've seen here, and also that need this transdisciplinary approach. First, issues climate environment. They are important globally. The Amazon, Antarctica, Arctic, Himalayas, and others. At the same time, issues about security, and in general, security, different perspective here. You have the perspective of the more, maybe in the Amazon, a lot of issues related to drugs and illegal crime and illegal activities. You have also indigenous people that like kind of different perspective, how you work with them. Also issues about isolation, access, and a lot of these places also see here being opened up. You know, before isolated is kind of a bubble somewhere there, like in a bubble, but now being opened up. You see the Arctic here for seeing a lot of routes, new routes for ships. In Amazon, also new roads, new perspective, and then this has a lot of consequence. You know, environment, indigenous people, and so on, and how you actually find the solutions for that is in what interdisciplinary is. Not saying that the disciplinary research is still very important, and one problem I see a lot of transdisciplinary research is exactly the people that the medical doctor try to be anthropologists, and then a sociologist trying to be a chemical engineer. That doesn't work. I think it's still important, the depth, but at the same time, it's a broad perspective. If political scientist, you're not supposed to be a mining engineer, but you need to know something of mining to do your work and connect with and dialogue, have a level of knowledge open to connect to the other discipline. But at the same time, you need to bring the depth of our discipline. Without these, not. And then I think a lot of things. I'm also in the steering committee of the Belmont Forum, where these perspectives is very valuable. Belmont Forum is an umbrella organization of funding agents. I think Norway is also part, European Union. That and it's interesting, like how you analyze those proposals. Like you need to have both the broad perspective of the discipline, the engagement with the actors, but at the same time the depth. You need really not be shallow. You need to depth each of the discipline. And I think the SATA, the perspective is more on the education level, but give these students, I've seen this opportunity to know, think broader than what they see in the classroom. Just and then I think that is I would say the future. Now. And I hope that in many aspects you'll see the world is changing when I start, like Ashmore, the 2018 or before. I think the last decade before COVID was really, I would say, the big decade of science and cooperation, because a lot of, I see also the agreements, Paris Agreement today will not be possible. And SDG, or the ambassador of Japan in session was chairing, possibly we're not going to have the continuation of SDG because there is a risk. And the science was the same thing. But if here all this change, and I hope the geopolitics is not going to undermine that, because I think it'll be a zero-sum game for all countries if you really put our heads in the ostrich kind of science. You'll be kind of shooting our own feet. And I think that would be this cooperation, despite of all the geopolitics and constraints that you have, could continue. And I think the Arctic Council, I think, is an interesting organization here that could see a way around this, and particularly also with these countries that are not Arctic but could bring something on the table. And I hope that the SATA And the future projects that will be funded by this really interesting approach for Norway will not be constrained by the geopolitics and think outside, I would say, how to, as I know that's difficult to separate the cooperation in research to find answer to problems to the global world, to the global perspective, and then this more regional or global geopolitics. But that is, I think, a challenge, a new problem. Maybe next, how you find a way around these geopolitics constraints that could undermine a lot of this transdisciplinary science that actually emerged strongly in the last decade, but I've seen retroceding in this decade. With that, I would like to just thank you again and give the word back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And well, I think we can just move to the next. To the technician, we have skipped one 5-minute session, so if you can just put the timer for 5 minutes now. Andreas, please.
I do have 5 minutes? Good.
Yeah.
I think I want to tackle that both from my personal experience and I think from the current professional experience I made. So I did my PhD not in engineering, but in political science at the University of Cologne by a distinct program the University of Cologne came up with on EU foreign policy. We were like 12 people dealing with different issues on EU foreign policy, and I pitched the idea to work on the EU in the Arctic. And the idea of that project was that you get the PhD from various universities, 2 universities. So mine was Cologne and Edinburgh, but you also get practical experience. So during my PhD time, I worked in Brussels at the think time. We had media training. We wrote op-eds. So there was a lot of additional work we had to do, in addition to writing a PhD itself, which in the long run was, of course, very helpful. During the PhD, it was sometimes overwhelming because you had to do your research. You had to publish it in various forms. You had media training. You worked for think tanks. You had to apply for research funding already, etc. So that having said, for a program like SATA, you know, there are a lot of challenges because you try to promise something, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but you still live in a university system where you have to deal with admins and bureaucracy and different languages being spoken. So I think the challenge for a program like this, but the opportunity is how do you manage that, you know, and how do you provide a student really with an opportunity that is less bureaucratic as possible. But in addition to the geopolitical constraints and whatever, there's also this admin issues. But nevertheless, you learn a lot, particularly for a region like the Arctic. Because what I have experienced ever since, and I think Rasmus, Florian and Whitney have experienced the same thing, in the Arctic world, because we are Arctic researchers, we're sometimes supposed to know everything. We're supposed to know the permafrost thaw in Russia and how it affects Russian infrastructure. Then when somebody asks you about Greenland, you're supposed to know everything about the party history in Greenland, you know. And then you go to Canada and people ask me, so what is the infrastructure issue in Canada? Of course you cannot. So, but it helps you to often start to say no. When requests come in, when you talk to people, that I cannot, but I know that and that person. Nevertheless, it also opens a bit your perspective on how complex and multidisciplinary challenges are. And that brings me now to my current work. I work at New University Business School in Bude, and we have a research center called the Heinrich Center for Business and Governance. And the focus there is to teach both our students under the business school, but also our PhD students, the perspective, an Arctic perspective that incorporates both a business perspective but a governance perspective, very closely working with local stakeholders, so with the municipality, with aquaculture industry, with cod cluster, whatever we have, you know. And I think, again, comes with a lot of challenges because there are different needs. The way you have to discuss your findings as a master student, as a PhD student, to your academic peers is different than compared to stakeholders in the Fylkeskommune or whatever, in the municipalities. But nevertheless, as Rasmus said, that's the future job market to some extent. And you have to be aware, like, okay, how do I communicate to different audiences, you know, in this complex world, and what kind of specific needs do they have? So I think the challenge is here is what Rasmus really well outlined in the world. It's not only multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary work between universities and societies, technology, but it's also like how do you bring in, I wouldn't say the real life, but the practical, the governance aspect, the business aspect, and how can we prepare? What you've been mentioned also with the Belmont Forum, I guess, how can you still be strong in your field, but then dig deep, and cut it or connect it with other fields. And I think that's the challenge, and I think that's why SATA is a great example, or others. Like, we don't need to know everything, but we need to be aware that others also don't know anything. But if we bring it together somehow, that's the key. And I think, in my perspective, it's really how can we prepare students, both on a master and PhD level, to also make them relevant on the job market, I would say, for businesses and others in a way which per se maybe they don't have in mind when they start a political academic career in my field, in political science or social sciences, that you also have expertise through the methodologies you learn through analyzing complexity that you can bring to a distinct business, for example, that you might not have on the agenda when you start your academic career.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Whitney.
The model of punctuality, so now it's going to be hard for me being rather long-winded. No, thank you very much, Rasmus, Frederica, for spearheading this, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I think building on others too, background, I mean, I'm trained as a historian, and I always thought history straddles this sometimes uncomfortable space between the social sciences and humanities, and depending on the university you're in, kind of determines which faculty it falls in. Recently, I switched over about 8 years ago to Canadian studies. Even more ambiguous. I still don't know what it means, but I love that because it means that I get to just be curiosity-based, inquiry-based. And the more I go and learn more, I realize the limits of my knowledge at all times, ontologically, epistemologically, methodologically. And it really encourages me where I'm going to end, which is, again, the importance of expanding networks and realizing more and more the humility that the more I'm curious, the less my expertise will satisfy all of that curiosity, so the need to interact. So very much in the spirit of SATA, a couple of reflections on approaches to field schools with which I've been involved. And again, it's interesting because you get to a certain point in your career and you realize you're organizing them, but you often find you get just as much out of them as you do put into them. So the first is an organization in Canada called Students on Ice. So it's a foundation established by Jeff Green, who's come to Arctic Frontiers several times. Some of you might have met Linda Brown, who's here representing Students on Ice. Its mantra is expeditionary learning, and that it's the polar regions that are your classroom. Brilliant. I was asked to do this first time about 15 years ago. And get on, and I told my wife it was probably going to be some refurbished fishing trawler, that we're going to be living this really austere existence. No, it's a cruise ship. The operators of the cruise ship loved it because they go from serving very old, even much older than any of us, clientele on the most part, who expect every service and amenity available, right? Because they're paying $25,000 American to go on this. They love it. You've got now a bunch of teenagers and young people, university students coming on, and then you've got this whole group of experts. And I use experts in quotes in a way because depending on what the subject is, sometimes you're an expert, but most of the time you're a student. And you're learning. You've got physical scientists, you've got people who are studying insects, you've got people doing DNA on the certain flora of the Arctic, you've got paleontologists, you've got the occasional historian talking geopolitics, let's say, and then you've got elders. Knowledge keepers. Mary Simon I met before she was here as, Governor General with us, as a knowledge keeper, sharing her experiences and her perspectives in various forms of service to Inuits and to Canada and to the circumpolar world. So really blowing up this notion that when you come to these things that there's one person or one area of focus that will serve all the interests. And what I found the most incredible was seeing young people, especially Northern Canadians, who maybe came from a small community, maybe this was their first time outside of their community as we've seen, and them realizing, wow, I want to be a botanist. But before they left their community, there's no way they could have even imagined that you could be a botanist or what that would look like. And you see every time you stop on shore, they're off with their little loop, their little magnifying glass crawling on the ground. And beside them is one of Canada's most eminent experts, who's from the Museum of Nature in Ottawa, who's there to explain what's going on. So again, I became such a convert to this notion of what my dear friend, the late John Mitchell, once said is, to understand the North, you have to be there. And for those of us who don't live in the north, right, it's that chance to be there, but then embrace the notion that only the first couple times do you come away thinking you know something. After you've been up 20, 30 times, you kind of realize just how limited that knowledge is. So another example, field school, that the network that I lead and serve, North American Arctic Defense and Security Network, got some funding with the U.S. Air Force Academy. So talk about bridging academia and government, and now the Department of War in the U.S. and the University of Alaska Fairbanks, again, another SATA partner, to organize what we call the North American Arctic Field School. This was a couple of years ago, and we basically had a group of students from U.S. Air Force Academy, from Canadian universities, land in Anchorage, do some quick tours around the city, then rent 2 cube vans and like an old, like we call them U-Haul van, like a transport cargo van that followed along. It didn't have snow tires, and it was very, very wintry in late November. And we basically went up to Fairbanks, worked with Troy Buffard, our partner there, toured permafrost tunnels, had lectures and briefings and listened to podcasts that we'd pre-recorded along the way, had discussions on our respective vans, would mix up who was in which one. And really simultaneously both seeing places in the Arctic, but getting a sense of time and distance. And I know a lot of the activities that we really were inspired by in the Fenno-Scandinavian and previously in the Kola Peninsula, right, the notion that you have to travel. So going from the perspective of a ship, as I've done on Students on Ice, is a very different way of experiencing and engaging the Arctic than it is going by a van. But again, interdisciplinary knowledge. I won't have time here to get into other examples, but other projects as well of the benefits of breaking through the faculty divide. So really understanding that engineers approach things with a different set of questions. It's very applied, but it's only through dialogue that we begin to really embrace and I think really cherish these different ways of knowing, being, and seeing. And again, the key being, as we go forward, the more we know, the more we ask better questions, the more we're encouraged to expand our networks to be able to access that expertise. And yes, it comes from academics, but it comes from civil society. And it's certainly in the Canadian Arctic, it's speaking to the real experts who are the northern peoples who live there all the time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rasmus, for the invitation. So I will as well quickly introduce myself. So I'm a historian by training as well, but I made my PhD in political science. And in France, my closest collaborator in the academia, I worked for 7 years with a physicist. So the transdisciplinary for me, it's something very important. This is what is driving me in the academia world. But as well as I have a very cross-sectoral experience. I work for the French embassy in Moscow. I work for environmental NGO in Buenos Aires, and I work for a big French business consulting company in Paris. So, and now I'm in the academia world. So when Rasmus kindly invited me to participate in Japan last October and November, to participate to the international symposium on Arctic research in Hachioji, close to Tokyo. Of course, I accepted. Actually, I was already planned my field in Japan, but then, yeah, so I was like, okay, that's a good opportunity to be with the students and experience this conference finally as a group, not as an individual, an academic. And it reminded me when I was a student, I had the opportunity to have a kind of similar experience. I spent 1 year as exchange student in Oslo, and then I participated in what they called the East Commune. It was a United Nations model, and during 1 full week, I participated to many meetings at the Norwegian Foreign Ministry. I met at that time the president of the Nobel Committee and different such kind of experience. So actually, it reminded me a similar experience that I had at that time, so over 20 years ago now. And there is different things that I guess that the students may benefit from this huge experience. There is, actually, I thought a lot, and there is different points that I would like to highlight. The first is, of course, the learning. I mean, it's a graduate, it's education, and the knowledge that you get to go and to expose yourself, the student expose themselves to other disciplines, art science. You had many panels on permafrost, glaciology, oceans. So that is very stimulating from an intellectual point of view. It opens as well the view of the world and outside of your own discipline when you are as a PhD or a master student. Another important layer is, of course, the cultural dimension and the exchange. Being in Japan is a very different world, and I had a lot of discussion with the students that the infrastructure, the way the country, the food, many different layers, and of course the good one, and of course each country has its dark side. So that is very interesting experience as well for the students. A third layer, I would say, it's the engagement with stakeholders. And Rasmus and Frederica organized quite this very well, because there is the conference side, but then we participate to the conference dinner, which was very interesting because it's a Japanese way. So you have a specific code on such a kind of event. And then we have the chance to visit the upper house of the National Diet and discuss with different members of the parliament, which is, the value of such experience will guide you for a long time. That's my impression and my experience that talk about this. And the last, and I think very important, it's a thing to go at class and have your semester course, but in a world where now you have artificial intelligence, I think field course will have even more importance as a value for future professionals. And the benefits you will get from this will be very huge, and because you gain soft skills. And I'm afraid that artificial intelligence cannot give you such skills. So thank you, Rasmus, again.
Thank you very much, Florian. Thanks to all of you for very, very interesting reflections. And now I'd like to shift to the younger adults. So if I can ask you to step down for a second. There's one more here. Yeah, so Emil, Andrea, Nina, Yara, Pelagia, I've had the great pleasure of traveling with you for some of the SATA activities in North America and East Asia. And you are all master's level students at UIT. So now I'm very, very curious to hear from the student perspective, what is it you're looking for in such, as we talk about these transdisciplinary field course activities? What are you looking for? What is of value to you? What else? What more? What different do you think that you are looking for, that you need? I think we can just start from the end. Or now I don't remember. There was like an order, how to say. Let me see. Okay, let me pull up that order. Yeah. Okay. So I don't want. Okay, Nina, we start with you. Yeah. Sorry, Nina. I see you first here.
Okay. Well. No. Perfect. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nina Eredic. I am an LLM student on the Law of the Sea program here at UIT. My background is in environmental law and Scottish law, so the introduction to the Arctic is quite new, and I think the main thing that SATA and multidisciplinary education has brought me really is to introduce me to the Arctic from a perspective sort of as an outsider, and has also provided a sort of community to get involved with it in so many different ways. And well, I started at the SATA program in October, so I have joined this group in Canada, the US, and most recently South Korea. And on the side of that, have also been able to get involved with seminars and symposia. And really what I think is a sort of interesting way to start is that it's not necessarily easy as someone in my position who is still at master's level to get engaged with these kinds of events, and for Rasmus and Federica to have provided an opening to get involved and meet so many interesting people who are involved in so many different areas. It humbles you, and at the same time it really enables you to build this network, because really you run into people again and again and again, and it's an incredibly valuable way to also build these networks. So as a second point, because I'm looking at the time as well, I think I would really like to sort of come back to what our other participants have mentioned before, is the openness of the program itself when it comes to engaging with other disciplines. So in South Korea, for example, we were with the students of the Kobri Institute for a week, many of them who were involved in natural sciences, from, I think it was microbiology, botany, many subjects that I do not know anything about. And in the end, it provided such an interesting way to engage and to learn from these people, and also really forces you to set your own expectations or any previous knowledge of the country you might have to the side, and really be open to these connections. And rather than just on a knowledge level, it also, like Florian mentions, teaches you so much about the culture as well, which in the end you don't know when it's going to be valuable. So yeah, what I would maybe want from the program in the future is, most of all, hopefully for it to continue, and also to provide for many more students to be able to get involved. I think the structure of the program itself, the basic layout of the journeys, and the opportunity to get involved with these different kinds of events as a core, I think is most important, because in the end, as a student, you decide how you are going to spend the time at these events, which people you are going to engage with. So I think it's also partially on the student to make that decision and say, this is what I want to get out of it. This is what I need for my own personal and professional growth. So yeah, this really sort of sums up what I wanted to say. And the main points really are the openness and I think the personal and professional growth that you get out of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. And I think next we had you, Andrea. Yeah, Andrea, please.
Hi, I'm Andrea Kroken, and I did my bachelor's at UIT in political science. Rasmus was one of my professors. And then I did my master's in LLM Law of the Sea, which Nina is now doing, and now I'm doing a course in peace and conflict. So it's safe to say I don't know what I want to do, but I'm trying out different things. And being a part of the SATA program, that was very helpful in trying all kinds of different things. It was exposural therapy, but it was amazing. And I'll take you from start to finish really quick. It started in Iceland with a different project, the International Graduate Student Research Cohort, which we had 7 months to produce our own research, which was funded by UIT, the university, in collaboration with a bunch of other universities. And so that was the start of it. I traveled from Iceland with Rasmus and Federica to Canada, and we were there, and we went to Stadsråd, which was an amazing experience, having a conference on ships. I think everyone should do that. It's a genius. With the Arctic Frontiers Abroad. We then went to the US, where several of us actually got to speak and participate on different levels. And we were exposed to all kinds of different peoples and different levels. And that was amazing as well. After that, we flew to Japan, which was very, very different. And being exposed so fast to very different cultures was also, it's a process. You get, it's time differences as well. So maybe you're sleepy, but you really, you're so motivated. There's nothing that you get energy from being that motivated. Then went back home and to Norway, and then to Korea a little later. And there we also got to present our master's theses. And we learned a lot from each other. We were students as Nina mentioned, we were meeting other Korean students, and we got to discuss our theses with each other. And very few of us had any knowledge or background on what any of us were doing. So we really got to talk to each other and learn from scratch about new things, microbiology and the different things that Nina also mentioned. One of the Korean students were talking about seeds, and I don't know why, but it really stuck with me. I wanted to learn more about seeds and the transport of seeds. So we got to talking about how seeds are transferred on ships throughout the world and then planted. And both of us were like, this is something none of us have properly thought about. Why is this so interesting? It has nothing to do with what either of us are writing about or reading about. So then, and out of this, I mean, when I met Arctic Frontiers abroad, I was just finished writing the thesis, waiting for feedback and grades, and the tension you're waiting for 6 weeks is brutal, in my opinion. But then I got a little job for them, just a small thing to do for them when they were in Canada and the US. And then after that, I got a job here at Arctic Frontiers as their coordinator as a temporary contract. Hence why I'm here today working the conference. So that's one opportunity I got straight from the SATA project, which is amazing. And after the Korea trip, I met someone at the conference, and he invited both Emil and me to produce research for him and get it actually published. So in June, I'll also be published due to the SATA project, which is amazing. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities and actually having learned by UIT to grab them when you see them. And worst case, you get a no or you fail at something, and personally, I like to dive head first and think after. So that's also kind of what the experience was. And so yeah, my answer is I have no idea, but I know a little bit. I think I know a little bit more now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Emil?
Yes, okay. My name is Emil. I'm not an engineer, but I'm a computer electrician by trade. So I have a transdisciplinary background. And right now I'm writing my master thesis in political science. And I have practical experience working, for example, for the Norwegian Labour Party. And I've done also computer electrician trade stuff. So I have a mix of everything. And this background has also shaped how I view the world, how I travel, how I... especially on my experience traveling to Japan and Korea, two very highly technical and technological countries. And my research also focuses on technology, AI, and government and governance. And SATA has been very important then in incorporating all of these and being a, how do you say, like, this chart you had of culture, nature, society, etc. And this can be read in theory, but you have to live it and experience it and travel to see these in person to actually understand it. And being physically present actually, reveals that being like Erasmus did an example here the other day. As a Scandinavian, it is quite shocking being put in the middle of Tokyo. It's it's quite a shock when the biggest building we have in Tromsø is between 10 and 20 floors, and in Japan I had dinner on floor 200 whatever. And for example, starting with my trip, I was only in Japan and Korea, but interactions were very structured, very culturally defined. And coming from a Scandinavian culture of low shoulders is very, different. And instead of I can talk a bit about our experiences traveling. The conferences were very interesting because they led us on a very transdisciplinary approach. There was a lot of technological and STEM presentations that we didn't understand that well, but we understand 10% more now. Me and Andrea, we were clever and traveled a lot outside the program as well, and got to see the countryside outside the major cities. And a story I want to share, for example, from Korea, like Whitney mentioned, is that we got to go on a VIP trip. I don't think they were used to having students. Like they had a lot of fun, like also bringing students into a VIP trip, which is usually meant for high-level officials. And also, me and Andrea went on a little side trip in Korea. We went on a little island outside this Korean peninsula called Tsushima, which is a Japanese island. And being able to experience the immigration system between Korea and Japan was a very invaluable experience, where we almost got stuck in Japan due to a lot of reasons, but for context, Tsushima is a cash-only island where you have to withdraw money before arriving to the island, where Western credit cards don't work. And we were running around the entire island trying to find cash, begging for cash, and we ended up at a Japanese-Russian friendship monument, which was celebrating or commemorating the Battle of Tsushima Strait, which is one of the biggest naval battles in history. And we managed to get back after begging for cash and trying to come back or not causing a diplomatic incident. And after praying to get back, they finally brought out a what's called like a card machine. Yeah. So even though you can go to Japan and Korea, highly technological countries, sometimes it's suddenly cash only, is my analogy.
Thank you very much, Emil.
The amount it was in question was about 178 crowns to get back to Japan, Korea. So
$10 US.
Well, I'm very, very happy. I'm very happy you got back, and I'm very happy you didn't cause a diplomatic incident. So I think the next is Yara, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Jara Nieuwenhuis. Thank you for inviting me. It's always nice to be here at Arctic Frontiers. Speaking about trends or interdisciplinarity, I have a bachelor degree in biology, which is how I started out, and then I figured out, okay, politics is also quite interesting actually. So then it was a bachelor's in that too. I recently finished a master's in freshwater ecology, speaking about climate change and how it's affecting Arctic freshwater ecosystems. And now I'm trying my best to finish a master's in political science as well. I also have a little bit of experience working with international environmental cooperation with the county governor of Troms and Finnmark here in Tromsø and Vadsø. So yeah, my first experience joining the SATA group, that was, I think I just came back from Pasvik, and it was straight from Kirkenes to Oslo actually first to Tromsø, then to Oslo, and then to Seattle. Which I was also at the event from Arctic Frontiers. Very interesting discussions, and then later on I also joined to Japan. So for me, when it comes to interdisciplinarity and Arctic issues, I think it's very natural to look at all these different subjects and disciplines, especially climate change, and now unfortunately also the geopolitical tensions, or whatever word you want to use for that. There's a lot of interesting phrases being thrown around at conferences like these always. They also don't really respect the boundaries of disciplines that we are quite used to. Climate change, most people might think of it as a very biological and environmental and climatology perspective, but of course it's impacting everything for people living in the north and inevitable also non-Arctic countries. So for me it was very interesting to join to Seattle and Japan and sort of see the differences in dialogues at conferences and symposiums like that, because of course the Arctic wasn't too new for me, as I've been studying at the Arctic University here for 5 years. But it's also trying to understand what the interests are for countries or nations that aren't directly in the Arctic. What kind of interest do they have in the Arctic? How do they view it, not living there? which I think is incredibly valuable. I feel like in the Arctic, some might really have this perspective of, okay, why would these other countries be interested? You know, maybe a bit doubtful, like, hey, this is our area, we live here. But we can't do it like that. We need all hands on deck when it comes to climate change and helping understand the changes and how we are hopefully able to adapt to them. So it's been really interesting to just be in different countries and listen to the kind of dialogue that people are having about these issues, the different focuses. And what I've also missed a bit in maybe like the Norwegian perspective is also, you know, how is Russian research doing? What's happening in Russia? What's happening to the indigenous groups in Russia? I feel like after the war in Ukraine, that dialogue has been completely lost, maybe understandably so. But yeah, it's just been incredibly valuable to travel to these different countries. And I always like being in sort of interdisciplinary groups. I think it creates a very disarming or very open way of talking to each other, because nobody, I mean, you're all little experts in your own field or your own thesis, but there's so much to learn from the others. And there's this thing, I'm not sure if it's like a broad term or, but it's called knowledge blindness, is where you sometimes undervalue what you actually know. And being in groups, being able to explain a bit but what you're doing and learning what the others have been doing, I think it's such an easy way of talking to each other. And I think that's really important for students, because usually as a student you're the least experienced, the youngest in these type of settings. So it's very nice to actually feel like, okay, I can contribute a little bit and we can talk to each other about these issues. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Yara. Pelagia?
Yeah, finally. Now it's the correct time. Hello everyone, my name is Pelagia. I come originally from Greece, but I ended up here due to my master's program that is in environmental law. I am doing the same master's as I was doing in the previous years. It's a joint Nordic master, meaning that for each semester we're in different Nordic country. We started with Sweden, Finland, and now we are here in the Arctic. And I could have never imagined myself being in the Arctic or dealing with Arctic issues, but at the same time, I never wanted to become a lawyer, so I learned the hard way that never say never. But through this whole SATA experience, it was really eye-opening for me. First, I only participated in the Vancouver-Charlotte trip and then to Korea. It was my first time in all of these places, Vancouver, Seattle, Seoul, and then Busan. Then we went to Korea, South Korea. And just the fact that I had this conference at first in Vancouver and Seattle on a ship, it was an experience by itself. But also I had the opportunity to participate due to the fact that the Arctic Frontiers gave me the opportunity to speak about blue economy. That is something that I'm very passionate about, and interact with experts. That was an amazing experience. And from all of these discussions, I could understand that complex problems can be understood on or governed within disciplinary silos, cannot be understood or governed within disciplinary silos. And it made me think about the Arctic, that it's also a legal space, it's a political space, it's a cultural space, but at the same time, it's a living space. We have the interaction with the indigenous people and how important is the co-creation or the integration of them in the decision-making process. That is something that in law school we just learn by the book, but we never have this in the practical aspect of it. And then during our trip in Korea, it raised my question, because usually we say for the Arctic, in the Arctic, but at the same time we had the discussion with the Koreans, and we couldn't understand at first why were they so interested in the Arctic, and we understand the importance, the political importance of this specific place, and especially now with the Greenland incident, we can also understand how everything is interrelated. In Japan as well, in Korea, sorry, as well, it was really interesting the interaction that we had with the students, because they have a very different way and perspective regarding education than we Europeans have. Actually, me and another girl that is not participating here, Margarita, that's from Italy, I'm from Greece, so we had this discussion with them about how many hours they spend in their office and how many hours they're just studying, and for them it was inconceivable that they need to have personal life. They were like, what do you mean you're living at 7? Usually I used to work from 9 until 9 in my law firm, and For me, it was exhausted, but for them, it was something, yeah, this is our everyday life. And they couldn't understand the difference between personal life, work life. Yeah, it's a cultural difference, I would say. And this is also something that I'm very thankful for Rasmus and Federica, that they give us the opportunity to integrate with the culture. In Korea, we had this very nice experience eating in this local traditional restaurant with a very important person from Equinor, and the discussion that we have, all of us European, with a Norwegian person in a Korean traditional restaurant. It was interesting, I will say the most, yes. But in order to sum up something, it's just because everyone had mentioned that, and it's really refreshing seeing experts discussing how this knowledge blindness that you already mentioned, this intellectual humility that you get from all this experience, that we basically know nothing about it. And the thing is that the majority of us here, we are perfectionists, or we're trying to be A+ students or whatever. And for me, not knowing something a few years ago could give me a heart attack. But here in the Arctic context, this uncertainty, it's mostly like, it's not a failure of knowledge, it's a condition, it's an everyday condition. And you can realize how important it is from the traditional transdisciplinary aspect, the fact that you should say, no, I don't know about. Can you please explain to me what do you mean? Because especially in the law department, just saying to my boss, sorry, I don't know that, he would have told me, he would have shouted at me, you need to go back, fix it again, study more harder. But here, due to the complex of the issues that we have to interfere and deal with and tackle, it's something very necessary to say no. Can you explain? Can you give me the feedback? Can you please break it up to me? So yeah, it's really refreshing seeing even experts that they are accepting this humility awareness. This is what I would say.
Thank you very much, Pelagia. So I think thank you very much to all of you, both the, shall we say, adults and the young adults. I think we have a lot of food for thought. And I was thinking the most easiest way is if, how to say, the adults could just turn around the chair, maybe one can take the free seat there, and then we can have a free-flowing discussion, about these questions of transdisciplinary and field courses. You've all given me a lot of food for thought. I very much encourage you to respond to each other. If I can just, while giving the audience a moment to reflect, some of the things that stood out for me in particular. Jose, you talk about this, all of you talk about knowledge and the importance of, how to say, knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. And then, of course, not knowing what you don't know is very dangerous. And this relationship between different areas of knowledge, where you have to know what you know, and you have to know what you don't know, and go to people who know that. And you have to be, Jose, you mentioned depth. You have to have depth in your own field. You have to know your stuff. You mentioned the medical doctor playing anthropologist. I mean, medical doctor is supposed to be able to do what he or she is supposed to be able to do, and then others have to know what they're supposed to do. That was something that stuck very much with me. And personally, I can find it very frustrating when you have discussions where, people venture into things that maybe they don't really know, and they don't know how to reach out to the people that do know. Whitney, you talked about, I mean, the importance of being on the spot. And I think that's, I mean, it's certainly in the Arctic, but in general, I mean, what you learn from being somewhere. And it can be being in, I had the great privilege of visiting Cambridge Bay, Kalututiak, last autumn in Nunavut. That, of course, is an incredibly educational experience. But as Emil said, as a Scandinavian being in greater Tokyo area, it's as educational as going to Nunavut. And then also many of you mentioned, how to say, having also the time to digest things and having the time to simply just be with other people. And there's one thing which didn't come up in our discussion. This is, of course, this is quite costly activities. So you have to raise a lot of money. And I mean, you mentioned students on ice. That's, I'm sure, a very expensive activity, which requires a lot of fundraising. And I have seen on other occasions where I have not been the organizer, but I've just contributed as an educator, that I've seen colleagues, very, very capable colleagues, make excellent activities in the Arctic, very expensive activities in the Arctic, and I felt like my colleagues, they were so conscious that they had raised a lot of money for very expensive activities, and therefore the program had to be very packed. And it had to be very academic, also because you have to report to a funder. Why did you spend all this money bringing a large group of graduate students, colleagues, to the high north? And it becomes too packed and it becomes too academic. And simply, for example, sitting in a cabin in Nunavut, eating traditional food with indigenous elders, that is so much more valuable than an academic lecture given in, for example, Nunavut. But then, I mean, you also have to, how to say, have the coolness that, okay, I'm going to defend to the funder that I spent a lot of money so that this body of graduate students could sit in a cabin eating traditional food with indigenous elders in Nunavut. And I mean, I give this example, for example, and I thought to myself, I mean, we were having matak, we were having frozen caribou, we were having frozen Arctic char, Michelin level food. It didn't look like it, but it was Michelin level. And I thought to myself, this is perhaps the most expensive meal these students will ever have. Yeah. But it's also incredibly educational. Okay, I could keep on. Questions from, comments from audience?
President, may I just, maybe we're
Sure.
ended. I love, one of the things I think that's come out of this, and I think you ended with this, Pleasure, which is wonderful, is like questions. And if anything, my critique of academia is we don't create spaces, and I think you've just reflected, Rasmus, on a lot of reasons why. It's such a gift, it's such a privilege to be in places where, as you say, you have time to think, like fancy words like discernment, where you actually get time to situate, but that you're valuing asking questions. And it's by going outside of our disciplines, going outside of our faculties, that we feel comfortable being able to ask questions. And I think field schools provide that, especially transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field schools. And I wish there was more grounding of that. If I have one frustration with academia, the whole model of how we go and test, how you're expected to demonstrate knowledge, I wish we would reverse that and say it's actually being able to ask really good questions. And when I look at people and think, people much wiser than me, it's not what they're talking about. It's often the way they craft something and prove that they're really listening. So one of the models I'd love to propose is how do we get funders to suggest that out of these field schools, it's not about producing a report demonstrating we've created new knowledge. Perhaps we've asked new or much more refined or much more subtle questions. And what I think that does, sorry, I'm speaking too long here, I don't want to take up too much space, but it's getting back to the basics of what we do as academics, as thinkers, and then for all of you, wherever we're at in our careers, to realize it's the beauty of being, having individuals who've created safe spaces where we then have the privilege of being uncomfortable culturally, intellectually, but being safe. And right now, I think it's a weird world where we're often inundated with the notion of, yeah, but it's unsafe. No, is it unsafe or uncomfortable? Because they're really different things. I never want to put anybody in an unsafe space. God, I want people to have a chance to feel uncomfortable because that's where the real thinking goes, right?
Andrea, I saw you put up your hand.
Yeah, it's a comment about the question. And it's an experience. Let's say I had in Korea where I asked, yeah, the critical question. I asked a critical question to one of the researchers in Korea about, because they were talking, the context is they were talking about how they wanted to increase the Arctic shipping when the route opens more, but also decrease it because secondhand environmental damage around the world, because the ice is melting, etc. And then I asked a question about it. And the response I got, the initial response I got before the question went unanswered was, I thought UIT would educate you better than asking questions like this. That was the first response I got from a researcher on stage to me, and I know it was a critical question I posed, with there was no negative, nothing from my side. I was genuinely curious, and they opened for this kind of question, and that was the response I got. So it was just stepping on my education as a master's student, first thing, and then went on about port states and coastal states and flag states, which was not in my question at all. And then, moved, and the question was for the whole panel. But yeah, so you also, pardon my French, but you also need balls to want to ask questions and then kind of brace for impact, especially with the cultural differences. Yeah, that's for me.
Pelagia?
Yes, if I can add here something, it was also this direction we had with the students, with the Korea students especially, because we did the presentations of our master thesis and then we had this open panel for discussions. And it was really hard for them to ask us questions. They didn't have any question pretty much, which is for us, for Europeans, with education that we have, it's go there, ask whatever you have in your thought, especially in Norway. They're much more open here in the educational system. And they had amazing presentations, but they had no questions at all, no critical thinking, which makes you also think about the priorities in the educational system, the different educational systems.
Thank you very much. I really would like to get the audience into the conversation too. Yes, Yara, I saw you. Yeah, please.
That was me.
Yeah, please.
I'm a bit out of this section because I'm here mainly for the science section of the conference. But the question I have is, this is a big cross-country program, right? But how do you, I just do not know whether students have to pay anything for participation, and how much is it if they do, and how in that case you keep it balanced, because I can imagine living in a Nordic country creates different socio-economical conditions for participating in this course. But if you are from South Africa or Brazil, that may have some implications. So I don't know to whom I'm asking this question, so maybe to the whole panel.
Well, I can address that very quickly. I mean, this is fully funded. So the activities are fully funded, travel, accommodation, many meals, and I think that's very important. It's important for me. I think it's important for Federica and for other partners, exactly for this accessibility, that it should be as accessible for all students as possible. But as I say, well, you have to raise money, and of course funders have to. And this program, this Utforsk, this Norwegian program, where the grant comes from, and they don't have any calls now. But it was a very generous program. It was a very generous program. And then you can also raise the question, I mean, why should Norway pay so much for students from other countries? There, I think you have to, how to say, think long term, and you have to keep a cool head, and you have to put, how to say, these sums into perspective. So, for example, Emil, I think it was Emil who mentioned the VIP trip we joined in South Korea, and the high point of this VIP trip was visiting a shipyard in South Korea, Hanwha Ocean Shipyard, which is one of the world's biggest shipyards. And they built, for example, these LNG, polar class LNG tankers. They've also built ships for the Norwegian Navy. I think they built a lot of offshore installations for Equinor, etc. So if you look at, how to say, if you look at it's public information. So for SATA 1, I got 2 million Norwegian kroner from this Norwegian Directorate. For SATA 2, I got 3 million Norwegian kroner. That sounds like a lot of money. But Andrea, what did the MOD cost?
The mod?
The MOD, the ship.
Oh.
So I think it's the biggest ship in the Norwegian Navy, which is built in that shipyard.
It's the biggest, it's the only logistics ships
Yeah.
we have, and it's the biggest process to build it because we wanted it so specific to Norwegian standards. It became such a complex. That's why it cost so much.
So yeah, I mean, how to say, 2-3 million Norwegian kroner into such an educational program, it looks like a lot of money. But if you think about, I mean, Japan, the world's third or fourth largest economy, second or third largest advanced economy, a very, very important economic, scientific, technological partner for Norway, then I think this is money very well invested, because the stakes, the economic, the scientific, the technological, the diplomatic stakes are so high, and you really want to invest in people on both sides who know these things and know the other side. Sorry for going on about, I hope it was an answer to your question. Yara, okay, Andreas, sorry, I overlooked you.
No. I just want to follow up also to that question, because I mean, obviously, spending money is always a democratic process in any democracy, and you should argue well of why you want to spend the money. Like, I think in an Arctic setting, and I always use now my son as an anecdote. My son is 4 years old, and of course I buy him all these Arctic books, you know, for children, and a program like that, an effort like that, and it's not only Arctic, can do something to overcome what I call the Arctic literacy gap, you know. Because if I buy my son books about the Arctic, it's about polar bears and ice, you know, and not about what we experience here, or I don't know, maybe in Kiruna, which is also Arctic, or somewhere else. So, you know, you can't measure it. You can't measure what will happen, or where somebody will end up in 10, 20, or 30 years in what job. But if that helps in the long run to overcome that kind of knowledge gap, you know, that we have, and then you maybe produce a children's book that is more informative, not about the Arctic, or, you know, more comprehensive, then you achieve something. But we might not experience that, because then we'll be in Spain, you know, and don't think about the Arctic anymore or something, you know, because we're retired. But, you know, that is something, again, you have to argue well in a democracy on how to spend money, and different parties, different interests have different interests to spend the money. So, again, that's a challenge if you want to stay in academia. The argumentation does not stop after you have submitted your thesis, then it becomes even more work. Not even more work, but it becomes different work, because you again have to justify. But then it's also about having balls to say, I want to do it regardless. And then sometimes you fail, and sometimes you win.
Jose, I saw you indicating.
Yeah, is this question? At this point?
I just wanted to quickly add to that, because when it comes to like searching funding, I think that's exactly the reason why a lot of maybe more natural science that we used to view as completely separate from politics really are impossible to separate from politics. If you want to conduct research, especially when it comes to climate change, and it's quite expensive to do research in the Arctic, you do need funding. Most of the funding will come from government organizations, so you kind of need to know how to build your projects around political needs to be able to get the funding to do your research, to again give back to the policy. So I think there again it's important to learn how to communicate science interest back to the policy and the other way around, because you can get done a lot more if you sort of find meeting points there. But it's just like different disciplines, it's different languages sometimes, so it's, yeah.
Thank you. Jose?
You know, just this point also, sometimes is have this kind of program, even for you to be reporting, see the public value of this public good for not Norway, for the beyond that. In terms of knowledge creation and knowledge generation, this is very important because knowledge is a public good. At the same time, a lot of things that you don't see straight away. One thing, I'm not sure if you're political scientists, called like soft power. Like you create a lot of countries, they have the soft power through the knowledge and through interaction between people. For example, I will give the example of Rasmus and myself. We met in Japan, and Rasmus was funded like 3 years by a fellowship from Japan. At the same time, you know, the benefit you here in this event, you organize a session with Japan, and the Japanese ambassador was in session, Andreas was chairing, and it gives more access to, and I think a lot of these, I think he came because you invite him also, you know, for this event. He will not come. Maybe all the way from Japan he came for this. And I think this soft power is something that these kind of initiatives is kind of could show more value, because I think sometimes this is access you have that you build like 20 years ago, but you need it now. You don't need like 20 years ago, 19, but you need now. You have this access. And then this is very important in terms of this kind of collaboration. You build, like you now have friends in Korea, Alaska. Maybe you don't need now, but you said you are, but maybe when you become like prime minister or build a startup value of unicorn, and then kind of you need some people in Alaska, you have it. And I think it's very important that these aspects, but at the same time is part of it how you kind of show, because you know a lot of our donors, they have to show the value of this thing, this aspect of more public value, not only like students individually, but as a large effort to build something that maybe is not be immediate and for individuals, but something that is larger, you know. And then I think soft power, knowledge generation, a lot of these things can justify such kind of initiatives, no?
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Just one more anecdote, because you know I get to that age where I use anecdote instead of analytical findings. But we should never underestimate interdisciplinary. And I remember this one anecdote. I was at a conference in Brussels about the Arctic with a lot of natural scientists there. It was a policy related for a conference. And I talked about what we often do with Erasmus about the many Arctics of the Arctic. You know, the Arctic is so complex. And afterwards, a marine biology came to me and said, it's the first time I heard that, you know, for me, there's only one Arctic, the Arctic Ocean, you know. So, and, you know, it made her thinking, and it made me thinking that, you know, yeah, we talk about the same space, geographic space, but of course we use completely different language. And mine is not more right than hers, but in many ways. But yeah, that was a really, yeah, a valuable conference years ago.
Any last comments from anyone on the panel? Whitney?
And just so it goes without saying, thank you, because the amount of effort, Rasmus, Frederica, you know, to secure the funding, but to administer the funding, to manage the reporting and all of that, thank you, because that I think often goes unstated at events like this, where we're all beneficiaries from your hard work. So very heartfelt, very genuine to say thank you, because I think the opportunities here, we're already seeing the demonstration of value. Hopefully the recording's there for the funders. Maybe this can be part of the submission to see the impact it's having. But thanks.
Thank you very much. And Whitney, as you point out, I mean, running these things, it takes very professional work. And that's where I enjoy very much. I'm very grateful for collaborating with Federica. Andrea and Emil, they have also participated in other activities that Federica and I were running before in connection with the Nansen professorship in Akureyri. We've been in Iceland, the Faroe Islands. Didn't have time to talk about that today. Can I ask for the the PowerPoint presentation once again? Can I ask for that again? Because just to conclude, so yeah, I wanted to return to, I gave the one forward, please. Yes, please. I gave the example of this business history, Outlook, Udsyn, the Danish East Asiatic company and the world. And it's just to conclude on what we talked about here. And it's also, how to say, a word of caution for the academic sector. Because as I mentioned, the Danish East Asiatic company was by far the largest, by far the most complex Danish company ever. And they basically had no interest in the Danish higher education system. They ran their own business school, and they ran, apprentice-based, their own training program. So I think it's really a thought of caution for, like, of course this is 100 years ago, but it's a thought of caution for universities. If you have the biggest, most complex company in your country and they have no interest in your universities, in your business schools, they run things themselves. So that's one point. And the other point is, as Martin Iversen, this professor of business history at the Copenhagen Business School, as he points out, and it's the long-term consequences that some of you have pointed to, and Jose, you brought up, that eventually the East Asiatic company, it became so global, so complex, and it became too complex for its own good, and it disintegrated. But yeah, the lesson was it had built up so much global human capital, which went on to other businesses. And this long-term building up of human capital with a global outlook. So I'll end on this note. And thank you very much for your partnership. Thank you for your participation. Federica, thank you for collaboration. The audience, thank you for your attention today. Jose has a flight to catch, so we will conclude here.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Maybe take a picture.
Yeah, we need a picture. Federica, come and join us, and somebody take a picture.